There you
That's
go.
better.
Okay,
Awesome.
excellent. Well, welcome back, everybody. We're going to jump right in. We're on our second session. If you missed the first one, we do have the recording of it, and this one will be recorded as well. And basically, our goal for today is to just continue moving, really exploring the principles of adult learning and cultural considerations in the sense of what we want our volunteers to go into this setting knowing about adult learners and adult learning theory. And then understanding and practicing some of the trainer competencies that pro literacy suggests, and deciding what we want particularly our tutors working with adult basic literacy learners to know, what we think they need before they leave our sessions. And I'm going to start with this. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to do the training styles inventory. Did everyone have a chance to do that? It was in the Google Drive, and if you didn't get a chance to do it, it's still there, so you can do it before next session. Did anybody get a chance to do it?
This is Mona. I did it.
Mona, excellent. So where did you land? So basically, this was a list of 15 questions, and then it placed you in kind of your training style. And it could fall in one of four corners, one of four quarters of this circle. So Mona, where did you fall? Where were you most heavily landed?
And is that, do you go by the total number? I wasn't
Yes,
sure.
everyone had the largest number.
Okay, then that was A plus E, the behaviorist
The behaviorist.
orientation. Yeah.
Excellent. So what this shows us and what you're looking at is four kind of categories of trainers. There's the behaviorist, and you can see the typical kind of mindset or style that goes along with each. So behaviorist is basically the idea that new behavior is shaped by what we provide to the learners, that we're supportive, we put a lot into preparation, building trust, and it's very product centered. Humanist is more, I would say, less structure, more open, more reflective. You can see the different categories here. The structuralist is all about kind of, I'm the one giving the directions, the strong leader in front of the group, very much teacher centered. And then the functionalist is really about letting people learn their way, kind of. And nobody is all one of these categories. It's like the Myers-Briggs or any of those kind of assessments that you take. You have a little bit of all of these things. When I took this, I too, Mona, was heavier on the behaviorist section. Did anyone else get a chance to do it?
Hi, this is Susan.
Hi, Susan.
How are you? I did the test, and I was mostly behaviorist and humanist.
Okay, very good.
They
Very
both
good.
scored a 5 for me.
Excellent. And there is not a right or a wrong. Let me say that up front. There is no good or bad. These are all just styles. Anyone else?
I also got behaviorist, but I mean, looking through the results in all the categories, there were lots of like ones and fours. Like there's a lot of split. Is there some research around like these being distinct categories? I
So there
couldn't.
is some research around this, and I can send you the information of where this came from. It's from Richard Bostrom is the researcher, and I can definitely send you more information about it. Mostly, the reason I share this with you is just like we sometimes have students do a learning inventory, a learning styles inventory. Are you a visual learner, kinesthetic, auditory? When we know our training style, not we have to sometimes we can modify our training style based on the participants. So for example, as a learner, I am very much a reading, writing learner. I learn best by reading things and writing things. I am not an auditory learner. So my default when I give instruction as a teacher is reading and writing because that's how I learn. And so I have to be aware of that to know that I have to work extra hard to make sure I'm reaching the other learning styles. And
I've
so the
seen,
same is true
yeah.
in the
I,
training styles.
Interesting. So I know that the learning styles has been pretty debunked around those being distinct, both in terms of people being able to assess their own and it being helpful for instruction.
I know that the research isn't there on it. But I personally know that that is how I learn. And
Okay.
what I can tell you is so there may not be research on it, but my husband is an auditory learner. And if I give him instructions the way I want instructions for any task, we have a total disconnect and vice versa. Um, you should see the two of us trying to put furniture together. He needs to
All right.
watch the video. I need to read the manual.
Sure
Um,
thing.
so, but I'm happy to share this with you and see if you find it helpful. And really, so what I do think is to know your sort of typical style and then know where you can fill in um, what you need to keep in mind when you're working with volunteers as you're training them. So just looking at this, most of us have just said the behaviorist kind of tendency is our where we land. So what do you think, if that's where you land, what kinds of things do you need to be aware of or incorporate more of when working with volunteers, when training volunteers? Any thoughts on that? For me,
So I know, hi, this is, hi, it's Jennifer. So I know like when I'm giving instruction, since I'm a structuralist, like, it says the teacher is the programmer, and that's kind of like, that's how I feel about it. Like I'm doing this task, this task, this task, and that's like our ultimate goal is all these little steps to get there.
yes, so perfect. So knowing that about yourself, you could look at letting go a little bit of some of the structure and the task, and allowing more opportunity. And I said this for myself too, more opportunity, particularly for letting people do things and make mistakes. Because I tend to have lots of very careful preparation, I want things to go my way. And so being more flexible in that and letting people make the mistakes to learn from them and to identify their own mistakes if they can. Any
Absolutely.
other thoughts on that? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. If you didn't get a chance to do it, it is in the Google Drive. Let's see if I can get my slide to change here. Regardless of your style, your strategy, I always think it's so important to come back to really all of you are amazing trainers because you care about your students, because you value the work that you're doing. And I think that is so reflective. So for anybody that in that first session said you were feeling nervous about training volunteers, I think as long as you can remember to come authentically with your value to the program, you're going to have an impact on the volunteers. And I think this is really important for us to share with volunteers. So I often will have multiple slides throughout my training that say something along these lines. Because as volunteers, as we're providing all this information to volunteers, as they start to sometimes get overwhelmed thinking, ooh, maybe this is more than I really thought I was signing up for. If you can sprinkle these kinds of reminders throughout, I always tell my volunteers, if you remember nothing else, remember that the most important thing you're doing is showing up. Because truly the relationship they build with their students is so valuable and is so powerful beyond, the literacy and the language is almost a bonus on top of that relationship. So I think that's a really important thing to share with our volunteers if they do start to feel nervous. I'm just looking at the chat. Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you, Nellie. Nellie put the link to the Google Drive in the chat. So I always sprinkle these slides throughout and just multiple times remind volunteers that the most important thing they're doing is really showing up, that this is a lot about relationship and that learning is about relationship. And so here again, we talked on these briefly last week, are the trainer competencies that pro literacy really looks at and really provides. So in each session, we're going to go over a few or one or two of the competencies. Today, primarily, we're looking at competency 1 very briefly, preparing for the training session. And then competency 2, which is establishing that appropriate learning environment. So just for competency 1, some tasks. I mentioned there's a Train the Tutor Trainer course packet also in the Google Drive. This on pages 3 through 14 has all kinds of like planning documents, things that you can think about pre-workshop, post-workshop, the day of the workshop, who's your trainer, recruiting your tutors, selecting the dates, all of that is in here. So these are sort of the pre-thoughts that you need to do. And I always like to think about this physical environment and really like Maslow's hierarchy of learning. Like people need to be comfortable. So are you providing breaks so they can use the restroom? Do you have snacks? Are the chairs comfortable? I know some of that's outside of your ability to control, but making sure all of those things are considered in addition to what you're actually presenting, the curriculum that you're providing to the volunteers. And I'm going to just keep moving. So please, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself and jump in. The next competency on pro literacy is establishes an appropriate learning environment. So this is true for us, again, us as trainers for the volunteers, but also for the volunteers to understand when they're working with students. And so we're looking at pedagogy versus andragogy, and I can never say those words correctly. But the difference between what it is to teach children versus teaching adults. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to think about adult learning theory as well as to help volunteers understand that adult learning theory, which basically says that adults are self-directed, that they come with experience, you know, that they have to be ready to learn, they have to be motivated to learn, and where that motivation comes from, and their orientation, that it has to be relevant to them. And so helping for us to know this to teach our volunteers, and for the volunteers to know this about their students. And so one of the things that I often do is just ask volunteers, I put them in small groups and ask volunteers to think about, what do you think the differences are of working with children, teaching children versus teaching adults? And the answers that I'm really trying to pull from the group is, again, that years of experience. So recognizing that we come in as tutors, not as an expert, really. We have the literacy knowledge, but they have all these life experiences and all this expertise that they can share with us as well. So it's really an exchange. Recognizing that adults have many other responsibilities. So while they may be motivated to learn, they have other things that come up. They have very little free time, work responsibilities, and recognizing that what we provide to them needs to be relevant, needs to be something they can use immediately, because if it's just something we think would be nice to know, it may not be worth their time when they have such little free time. And then a big one is like failures and successes, helping volunteers understand that many adult learners come to us with a lot of negative experiences around school and around learning. And so helping volunteers understand that with empathy and helping provide opportunities for success for their for their students. I showed you last week in the Google Drive, there's all the pro literacy training modules that has the slides, the PowerPoint slides, as well as the trainer notes. They have a whole module on it's called the Adult Learner module. So they have a bunch of slides about this that you could share in your training of volunteers. I'm just going through some of the slides that I share in my presentation when I work with volunteers so that you have them. You're welcome to use them if they're helpful to you. So helping tutors understand kind of all of this information. And the more that we can help them, the volunteers come to realize it themselves rather than just telling it to them. So that's my question to you now, for those of you that have been doing training. How do you get your volunteers involved in understanding adult learners?
So we have a slide in the presentation where we ask the students, or ask the group, what do you think are some of the differences between working with adult learners and working with children? And during our introduction, I've usually found out a little bit about them. And so especially I'll be like, hey, you mentioned you worked with like third graders a lot. What do you think some of the differences would be? Or I call on some people who I know are already working with adult learners.
Excellent. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that?
I kind of did like the same thing when I worked in an institution with inmate tutors. We'd have the conversation about like, these are your peers. It's okay to make mistakes. What is the difference between working with kids compared to adults? Because it is very different.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of discussion around this is exactly right. Giving people an opportunity to reflect on what might be different. Yeah, I agree completely. And also kind of in the adult learner module for pro literacy, they talk about, again, the difference, adult learning theory. They also talk about adult learners in that social emotional context. So again, coming with those past failures, successes. And then the other thing they include is really the cultural differences. So particularly when we live in a diverse community, that many of the people coming to us maybe are from a different culture, helping our volunteers understand that what they're picturing in their head as an adult learner may be very different than the adult learner that ends up sitting in front of them or across from them. I always like to share. Yes, go, Michelle. You go ahead, Michelle.
We talk a lot about some of the life experiences of our learners. So, we'll say, because I think people do come to tutor certification training with certain assumptions of people they'll be working with. So I'm like, my first learner held a PhD in physics from Cuba. So kind of feeling like we're leveling the playing field a little bit, and everybody is bringing something to the table.
Yes, exactly. So I like to show them some different student profiles. So whatever you have in your head, look what else it could be. So, I point out these couple different options for students, talk about varied backgrounds, varied abilities. Like you said, a doctorate, somebody, very intelligent people who have just come here and need to learn the language. And also the challenges of those that maybe have never been to school before in their home country. And so the challenges that are associated with lacking literacy in their own language and how that shows up in our sessions. On some of my slides, you'll see a reference to Lit Start. That's a book that we provide to all of our volunteer tutors. It's I should have grabbed a copy of it. I can grab a copy of it next time. It's just a really nice overview of adult literacy, and it has nice kind of sections that go along with the modules that are in the pro literacy training. So I do have some references to that as we go through.
Is that something you give like a physical copy of?
We do. We give a physical copy, and you can write a grant. And Nellie, maybe you can jump in and help me on this, to the Florida Literacy Coalition and get some of that cost covered to provide those books. And Nellie, do you know more information about that?
Right, yeah, I'll need to find it. We do have a link on our website to fill out a form to request that. So I will see if I can find that and put that in the chat if I do. If not, always feel free to email me as well with any questions, and I'll make sure that, we figure it out.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something that I think the Literacy Coalition never had to pay for. I think we had the grant for it. And then volunteers are leaving with something very concrete and a nice resource that they can refer back to.
Is the New Readers Press grant, the National Book Fund grant still open? Because it's through New Readers Press as well. I don't know if that grant is closed.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Nellie, do you know if that one's still open?
No, unfortunately, off the top of my head, I don't remember when the
Okay.
deadline for that one
Yeah, so
was.
some options to get these materials for your tutors. And I do think they really appreciate that opportunity to leave with something in hand. I have in here 2 videos that I like to share in our trainings, again, to give our volunteers that perspective of the adult learner. Both of these are saved in the Google Drive. This one is about just a native English speaker lacking literacy skills. And the other one is kind of the viewpoint of several English language learners and their experience prior to taking English classes and then as they take English classes. So those are both in there. And I think another good example for our volunteers of the types of learners they may be paired with. I think it's in this adult, oops. I'm not going to show them just for the sake of time, but you have those in the Google Drive. Helping our volunteers understand what low-level literacy means. It doesn't necessarily mean that our students can't read at all. And so helping volunteers sort of understand that. And this is, I think, a good opportunity to share some statistics with them. Let's see, I thought I had it in here. Again, in the Google Drive, the Pro Literacy has a really nice one-pager with statistics about adult literacy that can be shared in your training as well. So what that looks like and how that impacts people beyond just not being able to read. So in health outcomes, all sorts of those sort of outcomes. That adult learner module is also, as I said, a good point to identify that cross-cultural competency, recognizing, that's coming from different cultures, that there's not a right and a wrong, and also thinking about how these things might show up in your sessions with learners. And in ours, in an effort to, again, get the volunteers involved and engaged and talking to each other, so I'm not just the one doing the talking, I often will have these on strips of paper, and I will give 1 or 2 to different groups and have them then discuss at their table how that particular aspect of culture may show up in their sessions with a student. So helping them, again, reflect on it, brainstorm on it, and be able to share out their thoughts on that. Any other thoughts on good ways to share this with our volunteers? And again, another slide that I include when we're talking about this, that don't assume anything, avoid the judgment. And to me, that appreciate the learning opportunity for yourself, I think is so valuable. A few more slides that I often share in our PowerPoint for the volunteers. So you just have these as access, and we'll talk a little bit more about student goal setting, but I like our volunteers to have a sense of why our students are coming to us. And this is where I really talk about our job as a tutor is to help the students really accomplish their goals. I think sometimes we can get really wrapped up in the things that we think they need to know, whereas they have limited time, and the more we can address what they need to know, for their lives, the more likely we are to retain those students. Any questions so far? Any thoughts on this? Not even just questions, ideas to share, successes you've had in training.
A question for the room. So we've been giving, for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, a copy of another New Readers Press book. I don't have it here, but it's one that you outline here. It's Teaching Adults, an ESL resource book, and we use that both for ABE, for like adult, for basic education learners, tutors, and ESL. And the feedback that we've been getting is that people aren't really using them. They're not really reading them. And so I'm wondering if anyone else is having that experience. We don't really teach to the book, but I hate to throw money, good money at a resource that people
Gonna have a
aren't taking
cocktail.
advantage of.
Yeah, does anybody have thoughts on that? I can tell you my thought on it. If you have other resources that you're providing, so I don't know what you, and we'll talk more about this, but if you have like a specific curriculum that they follow or a specific structure for lesson planning, then I would say those resources probably aren't that
We
useful.
don't, we're very learner centric, like you say, we give them some resources, but a lot of it is like, you need to sit down and set a specific goal with your learners. If you need, we have a lending library to work towards those specific goals. And we use Ellie, we give learners seats on Ellie as well. But I'm just wondering if we need to continue doing that.
So my thought, and I'm very interested in anyone else's opinions, is that if you want them to use the book, so if you don't care if they use the book or not, then I would say you can just get rid of the book. But if you do want them to use the book, if you think it's a valuable tool that might make their tutoring more effective, then I would say in your training, I would do more exploration of the book and give them opportunities to look at it, maybe even design a lesson out of it, give them a sample student, and this is their goal, and then work in a group to go through the book together to identify which lessons or which chapters from the book are applicable. I would do something very specific that lets them explore the book in the training if it's something that you want them to use. Anyone else have thoughts
Thank
they
you.
want to add to that? And that really is up to you, depending on, we sort of talked in the beginning at the earlier sessions that training goes beyond sort of the first session. So if you have, I don't know if you have opportunities to observe your volunteers with the students or, sit in on any of their sessions to see if they are really effective with the learners. And if they are without that book, then probably not necessary. But if you sit in and you think, oh, they could probably be stronger in this or stronger in that, then you could incorporate more of that into your training with that resource. So looking at, so each session we'll kind of look at the basic literacy, the ESL. So thinking today just the basic literacy. So the training that you provide for your volunteers to work with those, they already speak English, they're learning to read. And within thinking about basic literacy, we'll look at the competencies in pro literacy for the trainer, for us as the trainer, as the professional presentation skills, and then the conducting the learning activities. So in terms of professional presentation, this is, of course, the things that we present to the volunteers. Appropriate body language, vocabulary, things that are meaningful to the audience. This one, I always like to touch on that appropriate, closed, open, and follow-up questions. I think so much in our training, the more we can say, and I actually haven't been doing it, so I have not been modeling this, the more we can say, what questions do you have? As opposed to, do you have questions? So giving them that opportunity or even the expectation that there will be questions. What questions do you have? And building in that wait time, being okay with a little bit of silence to let people process that and come up with the questions that they have. I think is really important for the volunteers. And then being able to take what they say and expand upon it. So using them as your really the volunteers end up feeling like they're contributing a lot to the training, and then you are able to just expand upon what they provide to those open-ended questions. And the competency 4 is conducting the learning activity. So this is true for us, again, as the trainer of the volunteers, and we want our volunteers to understand this in working with their students. So, how to give clear instructions. I think so often, especially new tutors, new teachers, we have this really great plan in our head and we think we've explained it, and then it falls flat because our instructions were not clear. So helping volunteers understand how to give clear instructions and doing that ourselves in the training. This facilitating exchange among participants, I think, is really important. And then that opportunity for review and practice and reflection. So we want to build these things into our sessions, and in building them into our sessions, let volunteers know that I'm modeling this for them to do for their students as well. So thinking about that and thinking about basic literacy. Basic literacy is a big topic, and pro literacy breaks this down into like littler modules that we want volunteers to be able to do and understand. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, and just think about when you train somebody to teach reading, to do basic literacy, what are your kind of key teaching strategies you want them to know, the key background knowledge you think they need to know? What are you including in this module? When you talk about basic literacy, what are the key things that you think it's really important for volunteers to know, understand, and do in your training session? Does that make sense? Okay, so let's see. We have, how many people do we have? 13, 11. Let's do 3 breakout rooms, and we'll do just like maybe 10 minutes. In those breakout rooms, you're just coming up with your list of kind of must-haves for a basic literacy training, what your volunteers should know to be able to work with a basic literacy student. Are you all familiar with breakout rooms? You'll get a little pop-up on, let's see. You'll get a little pop-up on your screen that says join room, and then you'll be able to do that. And Nellie, are you doing this, or do you want me to do this?
Yes, I've created the breakout rooms here and then I opened them.
Okay,
So
you should get an invitation to a room here. Okay. Bronwyn, did you get? Okay. Okay, so there should be 3 rooms. See what time I'm at. All right, welcome back, everybody. So I was able to hop into one of the rooms. I think everybody's back. It's hard for me to see if all those are closed. It looks like I might still have a few people. Let's see. They're going to get bumped back to us in 15 seconds. All right. Welcome back. Welcome back. So I was able to sit in on one of those breakout rooms. I'd love to hear any insights or takeaways from the rooms that you were in. What kinds of things were must-haves for your basic literacy module?
This is Mona. Well, in my group, there were only two of us, um, so what we came up with is, as trainers, we would want to know all the tools in our toolbox that are available to us, and like to have additional training after the initial training, like the just-in-time training that you mentioned last week, and then to have like a network that we could reach out to certain people if we were having different issues, like contacts that we could, reach out to.
Right. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Anything else that came up in your breakout rooms?
It's Michelle. I was in a breakout room with a couple of other wonderful people, and we were talking about sensitivity to like behavioral issues and differences in lived experience, real training in the learning tools, being learning to adapt to situations and being sensitive to educational trauma and potential diagnosed or undiagnosed learning disabilities.
Excellent. Yeah, that came up in the room that I was in as well. And how much we have to help volunteers understand that we're providing them with kind of an umbrella training, but when they're paired with a learner, there's going to be so much specific to that learner, whether it is a learning difference, the past educational trauma that may come with it, and helping volunteers get that big picture view, recognizing that there will be more kind of just-in-time training once they get paired with their learner and can really see what that learner needs. Yes, I agree. So let me go back to sharing my screen here. All right. Okay, so if I can get the slide to change here, let's see. Oh, I went way too far. Okay, so in terms of basic literacy, that PowerPoint and the trainings all from Pro Literacy Education Network, this is where this is what they cover in that kind of basic literacy training. So an introduction to literacy, of course, the working with the adult learners, lesson planning, goal setting, and then specifically to literacy, there's a section on alphabetics and word study, a section on helping your learner build fluency, on building vocabulary, on reading comprehension, writing composition and mechanics, and specifically the language experience approach. So this program, their training module is designed, I think, to be about 12 hours, which I know is often not realistic for us to ask volunteers to do. And I think some of this could be addressed in some of those just-in-time trainings. I do really like the kind of introduction to literacy instruction and helping volunteers remember or experience what it feels like to be a struggling reader. I think it really is helpful in building empathy. And so often, because reading is easy for our volunteers, they forget what a challenge it is for their students. One of the slides in the pro literacy training that I just love is this slide, and asking volunteers to read it on their own, read it silently. What can they take from this? And you can use this really as an experiential learning opportunity to say, if I just give you this and said, read it out loud to me, how successful will you be? And what would have been helpful if we talk through the picture first, if we identify some key words, if we, recognize the common T and what sound that makes, so that volunteers see that they can't just hand something to a learner and say, okay, go ahead, read it. But what can we do to support them in it? And then how do we use a text to build some of those other literacy skills? Another one that I use when we do in-person trainings, I ask our volunteers to what they remember about learning to read. And this is always interesting because it's able to evoke in them some of their experiences if they were in the high level, the red birds or the bluebirds, and if they remember phonics instruction or if they remember whole word and whole language instruction. And it helps people kind of bring them back to what that experience was. And then I hand out a booklet. I have it scanned in here for you to see, but I hand out a booklet and say, okay, well, I'm going to give you that experience of being a new reader again. So I hand this out and I say, take a few minutes and just see what you can do with it. See how you do. So they have an opportunity to read this book. And the pictures, of course, are helpful. And there's some language structure that's helpful and some repetition that's helpful. But I just give them an opportunity to read it first on their own. And it goes through the whole story. And then I ask them to, if they could read it. And usually they say, oh, I said, so maybe you couldn't read all the words, but you can probably tell me the story. And so they go through and tell me the story. And then I say, okay, I'm going to read it to you. I read the whole thing aloud to them while they follow along. And I say, wow, you really had a lot of that story correct. If you weren't able to read all the words, how were you able to tell me the story? So getting to that, yes, reading is reading words, but reading is a lot of other elements and components coming together as well. And then we read it out loud together, and they do like an echo reading that they read it with me. And it takes about 5 minutes. And then I say to the volunteers, from that brief experience, what can you take away from that in thinking about working with a new reader? And you get all sorts of responses to that, like, again, understanding how challenging it is, recognizing the importance of repetition, recognizing how pictures are helpful, that sort of thing. And it elicits from the volunteers some of the strategies that they can use with their learners that were helpful to them in that. And I always like to show them, I know I don't want to go too deep into this, but I always like to show them this Scarborough's reading rope, which is that model of reading that shows you all the different elements that our learners have to master, have to be a proficient reader with fluency. And so talking about the different kind of the 2 core strands and all the little pieces within. I think a lot of times our volunteers think that reading is decoding. And that's definitely an important part of reading. The phonics is an important part of reading, but also recognizing that there's a lot more involved in being a proficient reader. So I don't want to give them a whole long lesson on reading instruction, but enough that they recognize that, oh yeah, this is more complex than just reading words. So I always like to share this with them, usually after I've done that caboodle book or that Tony's trip with the Greek letters. And then I really introduce them to tutoring strategies. So when they're with their learner, what can they do? And this is where I like the Lit Start book, because I can touch on a few of them and say, and the Lit Start book has more information. It's very much kind of a how-to of different strategies. So if you have a program curriculum that you use, the breakout room that I was in, we talked about Lawbach, we talked about other New Readers Press books. If you have a curriculum that that you provide to the tutors. I think it's so, so helpful to really review it with them. Even if you're not positive they're going to use it, but to really show them the different components, demonstrate it. So you're the teacher reading from the teacher's guide, especially those scripted curricula. And then practice, partner them up. One of you is the student and one of you is the tutor, and go through a lesson side by side. Because while the scripted curriculum is easy in the sense that it's scripted, it actually takes some, I mean, even the setup of where you are, where you're pointing to in the book for the learner, really giving them hands-on opportunities to practice that with their learner, I think is really key. And again, they don't know exactly who their learner is going to be or what challenges their learner is going to have, but it gives them that hands-on opportunity to use the materials, that they may be working with. And then I like to provide demonstration and practice of a few other strategies, and you can pick kind of what you recommend for your learners, whether it's for example, if the student has a goal to pass the driver's license exam, then you can be using that specific study guide, that specific text, and how can you do it? If they can't read the words themselves, can you do echo reading? Model kind of what that echo reading is. Can you read it aloud to them? Coached reading. I always think it's great when I encourage learners to bring in things that they need help with. So did they get an electric bill that they don't understand? Did they get a credit card application that they're not sure what it actually is? And encouraging volunteers to encourage their students to bring in those things so that we know that the students are having it's a student, maybe their child's report card, a letter from the teacher, any sort of real life materials that they have to read, and helping volunteers to guide their learner through interpreting whatever those materials are. The KWL chart, does everyone know what the KWL chart is? It's before you do any sort of like nonfiction reading. It's basically you ask the student what they know about the topic before they start reading, and you can write down what they know. So it's like a 3-column chart. The W is what they want to know. So if you're reading a book about, I'm thinking like animals. You're reading a book about a giraffe. What do you already know about giraffes? What do you learn? What do you want to learn about giraffes? And then after you've finished reading, what did you learn? So you come back to those questions that you had, what you wanted to learn, and reflect on whether that information was provided in the text. The idea behind this is to show volunteers the importance of eliciting prior knowledge, so helping students access and share vocabulary, what they already know about something, and then giving a purpose for reading. So I'd like to know, this is what I want to learn, this is my purpose in reading whatever it is that I'm reading, and then reflecting back on that. So it's a good tool that you can use really with any sort of nonfiction reading. And you can use the physical chart, but it also is just a reminder to volunteers that those are 3 kind of key important steps in anything you read with your learners, is eliciting prior knowledge, setting a purpose for reading, and then recognizing kind of the comprehension piece, what we understood and learned from that particular activity. Again, depending on the levels of your learners, and you may or may not know ahead of time what learners they're going to be paired with, but helping provide concrete ways that they can help their learner with phonics instruction, with sight word instruction, if that's appropriate. I know some curricula will have that very explicitly and very systematically. Others, they may want to do word families, and there's some great videos. I need to put them in the Google Drive. I think it's the San Jose Public Library, but they have some great videos of tutors working with students and using all of these different strategies. So they have a whole video on echo reading. They have a whole video on word families with manipulative letters. a whole video on using flashcards with your students for sight words and making those flashcards together. So you can kind of pick and choose what feels appropriate for your learners. And again, you may not cover all of these strategies in your first training session, but if you do follow-up sessions, you could have kind of one or two strategies that you incorporate in those. And I know I had mentioned that I send out an email to our volunteers every Monday. And in that email, I often will include a link to a video or a resource. So that's a good place if you have that kind of regular communication with your volunteers to share like a 3-minute video that they can watch with a strategy they might want to implement with their learners. And then the language experience approach is another great one, particularly working with adult learners. Are you familiar with the language experience approach? Is anybody familiar with it and want to share what it is, since I've done a lot of the talking? And if not, I'm happy to jump in.
Not the one where you have them tell you a story?
It is, yes. Okay. So that's exactly it. It's you have them tell you the story. They dictate it, but you write it. And then as you write it, that text that you write then becomes your tool for practicing reading. So it can be about an experience you had together. It can be about their day. I mean, it can really be about anything. It originally was designed to use with students, like with a field trip, that you have a joint experience together. And then together you craft this text about your joint experience. But it can be anything. It could be if they have to write a note to their child's teacher and they want, they dictate what they need to say to the teacher, you write it. But then that text you can use to practice fluency. They read it back to you. And the beauty of that is that we know anything in that text, all of the language is familiar to them. The language structures are familiar to them because they spoke it. The vocabulary is familiar to them because they spoke it. So you know that you're able to focus just on the fluency piece of it. Or once you have, you've read it several times, you can pick out several words from that text and use that for some of your word work. So if they used the word, that or anything, you could then say, okay, well, if we know this is the word that, you spoke it, we wrote it, we know you just read it to me, this is the word that. And let's look at this. If we know that this is that, and you can do word families, we know cat and fat and bat and mat, but using a word directly from their own language. It's a great thing with adult learners, particularly because it's relevant to them and it's applicable. I think there are some good resources that have adult appropriate texts, but they can be hard to come by. Stories either aren't that interesting or, so this is a way that the text is something that is relevant to them because they've spoken it. As I'm saying that, one of the other resources, and I can put this in the Google Drive too, that has some good reading passages that are relevant and applicable to adults. It's called Marshall Education. If you Google Marshall Education reading, and I'll have to find the link specifically, there's all sorts of leveled passages and they're all relevant. They're adult topics and they come with vocabulary, the text. So it comes with pre-reading, the text, and then questions for after reading. It's a great tool to give volunteers if you don't have a set curriculum that they're going to use. If you don't use Lawbook or you don't use Challenger or Voyager, it's a great resource for accessing texts that are appropriate for adult learners. And they go from a very low level to a relatively advanced level. Other ideas, other strategies, other things that you specifically show in your training of volunteers?
Could you repeat the name of that last resource again, Megan?
Yes, you know what? Let me Let me see if I can just pull it up here. Oops. Let's see. Okay, it's read let me just copy it. Hold on. Let me put it in the chat. And they have it as PDFs that you can print, and they also have it as like an online resource. So I will just share my screen and share this. Okay, are you seeing it, reading skills for today's adults? And so it has all these different levels, and within that, let's just pick level 1. It has the stories, and they're all relevant for adults. Shopping for a car. So it has it electronically that you can do the pre-questions, the post-questions, or you can also, I think, get the whole thing as a PDF. Are you able to see this PDF here? So it has your pre-reading questions, the vocabulary, the text, and then the post-reading. And it has a whole bunch of different ones, and it gives you the Lexile level for it. So it's a really great resource.
And it will read them aloud at 3 different speeds.
And it will read it aloud at 3 different speeds if there's not a tutor right there to read it to them. Yes, you're right. So it's a good resource for them to use at home too. You can see that here. Any other thoughts on that? Or I'm just gonna pull this back up. Any other thoughts on that? Any other things that you use or that you would want to make sure the strategies that your volunteers have?
So we have a lot of strategies for ESL, but we were looking at the EBLI series that the Florida Literacy Coalition was training on recently to work with our growing adult basic literacy clientele. I'm wondering if anybody is using that, if Florida Literacy is making that training available or more available, or like what we're going to do with that moving forward.
I was in the breakout room with Linda. Linda, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience with EBLI?
Well, the learners that we had utilizing the program, we participated in the pilot, and I was waiting to hear something. I haven't heard anything about what the
We
outcome.
also participated in the pilot, and we have a couple of tutors that are using EBLI to seemingly good ends, with their learners. And so while we are trying to develop our adult basic education program, I'm wondering if FLCU is planning on doing anything else with that, or?
I had actually sent an email to Greg a couple of weeks ago asking if they'd heard anything back from the state. And at this point, I haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
And I apologize. I don't have much of an update to give there, other than I know it is something we're still trying to work on. But I can definitely bring it up again to Greg. Linda mentioned the email as well, so that we can hopefully get an update to you guys on that soon. But unfortunately, I don't have really any information on it.
I know you guys have a lot of plates spinning, so
yeah,
we appreciate that.
I don't expect a rapid answer on anything out of Tallahassee, but
oh, was that your outside voice, Linda? Oh my god.
I would like to. There are certain tutor teams that could probably benefit from learning that, and I've not moved forward with it because I'm waiting to hear something about whether we can.
Yeah, so yeah, we feel the same way. So and we are wondering, we're in this kind of holding place, this purgatory, where we're wondering, do we incorporate this into the programming, the tutor certification training that we're developing, or do we not? And what if not, then what do we do with all those damn little boards that we bought? We got the boards, we just don't have the rest of the training. So
That'd be great, Nellie, if you can follow up on that. That's
Yeah, I'll definitely see about following up on that. Yeah, I just said unfortunately I have no information right now.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And it's not a you thing. That's all from here.
Thanks.
all right.
Thanks for asking that question, Michelle.
Great. So we are coming up on time, but what I would love to do before our next session is if everyone could, it can be something you already use or you can do a little research. If you have one website, one for basic literacy, it could be, or one for ESOL or both, that you can share, we can really put together a list of resources that can be shared with volunteers with additional sites and places they can access. So it could be similar to that Marshall Education. It could really anything that you think would be beneficial for volunteers, and we can put together a resource list. So if you could bring those links for our next session on next week on Monday, then we can compile those and get us a list that we can share with volunteers.
I have a Google Drive, Megan, that's got everything sorted by category. So there's a file for alphabetics, a file for fluency, a file for comprehension. There isn't necessarily something in all of those files. It's a work in progress, but there's a file for morphology. The reading skills for today is
Okay,
in there,
amazing.
is in there under fluency. And that actually came out of a tutor training when I asked them whether they wanted copies of the PowerPoints. They said, no, put it in a shared drive.
Okay, very good. Well, if you feel that could be your link, if you feel comfortable opening that up for all of our participants to access, that could be your link to your Google Drive.
I'd have to invite everybody one at a time to that Google Drive.
You should be able to, you may not feel comfortable opening it up, but you can make it that anybody with the link can access it and then share the link with this group.
I'll have
So
to
you
figure
don't
out
have
how
to individually invite everybody.
Okay, let me go see what's in there. I haven't finished.
Or if you want to just pull out a few of the resources to share with us, that's great too.
Okay.
That's great too. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time. It's good to see you, and we'll see you same time next week.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank
Thanks
you
so much. This was so helpful.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes.